From studios at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, this is Fourth and State. Dave Walker served both Presidents Clinton and Bush, and now he wants you to know the facts about the nation's finances. Here's a hint for you. It's not pretty. I'm Dave Haynes. I'm the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and I'm joined today by David Walker, who's the former Comptroller General of the United States and is on a tour now, and has been actually for the last few years, emphasizing this issue. That is the need to get the nation's finances in order. And I think you call this tour the $10 million a minute tour. So
that's correct, Dave.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you add our total liabilities and unfunded promises for pensions, retiree health care, Social Security, and Medicare, the real number is $70.4 trillion plus, and going up by $10 million a minute. And that gave us the name for the tour.
$10 million a minute. Okay, so walk us through in a minute or so here, if you can. It's a big issue, but if you can just keep it brief. What is the problem, long-term problem that the country is facing that you're dedicating so much time to?
Well, the problem is demographics. We have 10,000 people a day eligible to retire for Social Security and Medicare. It's going to stay that way for another 17 plus years. In addition, healthcare costs are growing much faster than the economy. Thirdly, we have an outdated tax system and a significant gap between revenues and expenditures, and that gap is only going to get greater as time goes on. And then last, I would say, is we have historically low interest rates. We're adding debt at record rates, and therefore there's huge interest rate risk. If interest rates go up, we're going to have to pay a lot more interest, and of course you don't get anything for interest.
You get nothing if you're just paying off interest.
That's right.
Now we have, as a nation, something called, that we're all referring to as the fiscal cliff coming at the end of the year. This was a result of the effort to increase the debt ceiling last year, where essentially Congress put a bullet in the gun, pointed it at its head, and said, if you don't do this, all these things will happen at the end of the year. Sequestration, meaning some automatic cuts in things like defense, the end of the Bush tax cuts, all that. Nothing's going to happen before the election on November 6th, and that leaves them about a month. Do you think anything will get done in the lame duck?
Well, ideally what they'll do is they'll not extend some of those, but the big ticket items like the Bush tax cuts, the alternative minimum tax, the across-the-board cuts for defense and other kinds of spending, I think they're likely to defer action on those until sometime later in 2013 with the objective of trying to achieve a grand bargain. By grand bargain, what I mean is statutory budget controls, social insurance reforms, comprehensive tax reform that will generate more revenues, all geared towards trying to put us on a path to get debt as a percentage of our economy down to a reasonable and sustainable level, phased in over time.
And are you confident that, given the political atmospherics that we have in Washington right now, that a grand bargain is feasible no matter who wins?
I think it's possible no matter who wins. However, depending upon who wins would have an impact on what that grand bargain is likely to be, and when it is likely to happen. I think that President Obama wants a grand bargain. I also know that Governor Romney wants a grand bargain. They have different views of what a grand bargain would be, and they will have different degrees of leverage depending upon who controls the House and the Senate, and they have different, styles and leadership abilities.
But I think you've argued that any grand bargain would have to include both revenues and cuts. Is that correct?
There's no question. In my view, we need about 3-to-1 spending reductions to revenues. But the good news is that I believe that we can solve the problem with less total spending than today. We're spending at 24% of GDP. But we're going to have higher revenues than the historical average, but less than where we're headed under current law absent reform. So I see a win-win scenario, and we just did a major town hall meeting in Ohio this past weekend. 87% of the people said that it's going to take both spending reductions and additional revenues to solve the problem.
So when you are on your tour and you explain the dynamics and you explain the choices, what kind of reaction do you typically get from the American public?
Well, the American people are a lot smarter than politicians realize. They can handle the truth. They're willing to accept tough choices as long as it's part of a package they deem to be fair. 98% say that this ought to be a top priority for the election. 87% say it's going to be both spending reductions and additional revenues, and I'm very impressed with the intelligence of the American people.
Well, that's comforting to hear. Let's talk about health care. You made the point that, and many people have made the point that you really don't fix the problem long term without changing the health care cost dynamic. How do you do that?
Well, first, we're the only major industrialized nation that doesn't have a budget for what it spends on health care. Nobody else is dumb enough to do that. We've got to have a budget. Secondly, we've way overpromised on health care, way more than we can deliver. We need to rationalize our promises, focus on broad-based societal needs rather than unlimited individual wants. And thirdly, we need to move away from fee-for-service towards evidence-based practices, paying more for outcomes. We also need to get out of the business of providing very lucrative tax and premium subsidies for people who are well off. We need to do malpractice reform. We need dramatic reforms. The Affordable Care Act expanded coverage, but it didn't do nearly enough to control cost, and the chief actuary of Medicare actually says that it's going to cost $12 trillion more than the politicians claim. And I can tell you, I trust the professionals more than I trust the politicians.
So part of that includes some means testing for healthcare programs, for example, Medicare.
Well, means testing for premium support. I believe that we ought to have universal opportunity, but universal opportunity does not mean universal subsidy. If you're near poor and not eligible for Medicaid, then having a 75% subsidy for your premium is just fine. You or I should not have anywhere near that, and at some level of income you should get no subsidy based upon your income and wealth.
And I wonder what you think you're accomplishing so far with the tour. You're on the 11th day of a 33-day tour. What's your goal?
My goal is to try to help make sure that the economy, jobs, and fiscal responsibility are not just a top issue in the presidential election. They will be, but they're dealt with in a more substantive and solutions-oriented fashion, in particular with regard to the debates, so that the American people can make a more informed choice on who to support, so that whoever wins can claim they have a mandate. In order for us to defuse this ticking debt bomb, it's going to take extraordinary presidential leadership combined with the first three words of the Constitution coming alive: we the people. We can do it. Other countries have done it, but we don't have much time, and we really need to make progress in 2013.
Well, David Walker, thanks for joining us on 4th and State.
Good to be with you, Dave.
Thank you.